Welcome to BWIM's Leadership Roundtable, the honest conversation resource for churches committed to building healthier, more equitable ministry environments. I'm your host, Nikki Hardiman, and I'm honored to bring you a project dedicated to helping church ministers and leaders build intentional systems that foster transparency and equitable practices. In each episode, we dive into a compelling case study. Every story you will hear is a real story that has happened to real women in real Baptist churches. However, the events have been carefully composited and anonymized to protect the individuals and congregations involved. Our goal is to model a constructive dialogue, to move from analyzing what went wrong, the real struggles of navigating power, compensation, and change in the local church, to developing positive, practical next steps that any church can implement. Today, we are joined by our Leadership Roundtable, a panel of highly experienced women in ministry to discuss the case of the shifting sands of accountability. Thank you to each one of you for being here. Reverend Naomi Brown serves as the executive pastor and minister to children at West Hills Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. Reverend Callie Cawthon-Friels is the author of the book Reclamation, a queer pastor's guide to finding spiritual growth in the passages used to harm us, and is currently serving as the pastoral resident at Williamsburg Baptist Church in Williamsburg, Virginia. Reverend Bianca Howard serves as the Director of Institutional Effectiveness and Accreditation Liaison at the Turner Theological Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia. The Reverend Joy Martinez Marshall is the pastor of First Baptist Church in Ottawa, Kansas. I'm delighted to have each one of you here today, and we're going to begin by hearing the case study. Eleanor joined Harmony Baptist Church as the minister of music and worship arts, a role that encompassed both leading the choir and overseeing the technical aspects of the worship services. From the outset, the lines of supervision and accountability felt ambiguous. While she technically reported to the senior pastor, Travis, the practical aspects of her day-to-day work often involved collaboration with a long-serving volunteer, Patty, who chaired the worship committee and had a strong personal vision for the music ministry. This lack of a clearly defined supervisory structure created confusions and at times conflict. For instance, when Eleanor proposed incorporating new contemporary musical elements into the traditional service, she discussed her ideas with both Travis and Patty. While the senior pastor expressed general support, the worship committee chair voiced strong objections, citing the preferences of long-term members. Eleanor found herself caught between these differing opinions, unsure of whose direction to prioritize and lacking a clear policy outlining the decision-making process for worship music. The ambiguity in supervision became particularly challenging during the church's transition to online services, which was prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The technical demands increased significantly, requiring close coordination among Eleanor, the media team, which was comprised of both staff and volunteers, and Travis. While Travis retained the final say on the online service flow, the ultimate approval, there was no clear protocol for operational oversight of the technical aspects or the decision-making process leading up to that final approval. Eleanor felt responsible for the overall quality and the successful execution of the services, but lacked the direct supervisory authority to organize and direct the media team members involved. Without a defined operational chain of command, misunderstandings and delays became frequent. An incident occurred when a new sound system was being considered. Eleanor researched several options and presented her findings along with budget implications to Travis, the senior pastor. Simultaneously, Patty, without consulting Eleanor, also gathered information and presented a different, more expensive system directly to the church's finance committee, leveraging their long-standing relationships within the church. Eleanor was blindsided by this parallel process and felt her professional expertise were undermined. When she sought clarification from Travis about the decision-making process for capital expenditures related to her ministry, she received a vague response about the need for collaboration and consensus, but no clear outline of roles or responsibilities. Eleanor often felt that she was navigating a complex web of informal influence and personal preference rather than operating within a structured and transparent system of supervision. This not only hindered her effectiveness, but also created a sense of insecurity, making it difficult for her to advocate for her needs, the needs of her ministry and her team. The absence of a clear supervision policies ultimately contributed to frustration, duplicated efforts, and a sense that the professional expertise was secondary to personal connections and informal power structures within the church. So let's see if we can help Eleanor out. What is your first reaction upon when you read this case study? What hit you first?
It's a lot more common than we would like to think, right? Churches like to operate the way they've always done it and without formal structures a lot of times because for the most part it works
Mm-hmm.
until it doesn't.
Until it doesn't. Okay. All right.
I definitely felt frustrated for Eleanor and kind of just sighed thinking, man, this has happened in other ways to me and people that I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I think about just leadership, it was just lacking fully from the top. And uh, again, you're right. This does happen pretty regularly. It was not a surprise. I was kind of like Joy, very frustrated because it really was pretty much in a way an easy fix. But when leadership is not leading properly, it that things like this happen. So
Sure.
that was my first reaction.
Yeah.
I think for me, I just had several questions. You know, was part of the lack of clarity was like this a new role in the church? Had they not had an associate pastor like this before, or at least not in a long time,
Mm-hmm.
leading to the lack of clarity of like who's supposed to talk to whom and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so how did the lack of a defined structure for decision making influence the dynamics between Eleanor, Travis, the senior pastor, and Patty, the worship committee chair, in the early stages of her ministry?
I would imagine that Eleanor kind of thought that, okay, this is just the early stages of making relationships, and
Mm,
that I would imagine that she thought that she could work through those as she made connections and relationships.
mhm,
But without those clear boundaries or expectations communicated to her, she was unable to maybe build on kind of the newness of her role, but also
mm,
the energy and the gifts that she brought to it because she was unsure maybe of how to communicate those clearly because there was no communication to her.
yeah.
I think the energy is a key there that I think about because, if she is constantly feeling this pull and feeling like there are differing opinions on how she could go or that things are getting squashed at every turn, you get to the point where you aren't excited, right? And you
Mhm,
feel beaten down. And the creativity and the all those gifts that she brought to the congregation that she wanted to share with them as she served, those get quieted in a way.
Right.
Kind of like what Naomi, I was listening to what you were saying. I think I admire her because she continued to push forward. She continued to try new things and try initiatives and see what would work. But she kept hitting a wall. And so, I admire the desire and the motivation to keep going. But like she said, I think she was starting to just every time it was just diminishing her and making her feel, her self-esteem and,
Sure.
and not feeling like supported, I think I would say.
Yeah.
Um, and so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And I think, Naomi's comments reminded me of just, I feel like that's the position that you want someone to feel free to be creative in. When we talk about like welcoming people into worship and how do we get people engaged in the moment of worship and whatnot. And it reminded me of a satirical job ad I saw on Facebook recruiting a pastor. And it said, wanted, inspirational pastor who will radically motivate us to be exactly as we are.
Yeah. I've seen that one for sure. And I think one thing y'all are really picking up on is how important those early stages with a new church are. It's where you set a tone, it's where you begin making those relationships, and it's where you can capitalize on being new. And it feels like some of the things you're saying that kind of got taken from her because of the confusion and lack of accountability. So, what do we think that the case study is? What do we get from the case study or just from your own experience about the relationship between a clear process for decision making and trust within a church staff?
I've kind of been in the middle before in different settings, and I think one thing I continue to do is keep getting clarity and keep getting having communication to
Mm-hmm.
get clarity, even when I wasn't getting it from the top. I would uh, kind of take my own initiative and ask, and in a way, kind of be bold about it and just say, "This is what I need to do my job."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I get, it's frustrating when you have to wait from the one from the top
Right.
to make decisions. But so it's on, it's almost like taking your this position in your own hands and saying, I need clarity or I can't do this,
Right, right,
just
right.
being very honest.
Mm-hmm.
Because I that is the communication and clarity is I need that in jobs. And
Yeah.
when I don't have it, I really cannot stay. It's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I agree. I also think that can be very intimidating. And I wondered as I read this, how is Eleanor a new minister? Is this her first call, or has she been a couple places before? And I think that kind of matters, right?
Mm-hmm.
You as you have experiences, you can learn to be a little bit bolder, but that the boldness to ask for the clarity doesn't come naturally to everyone, right?
Right.
So I just kept thinking how important it is. Um, and I may be jumping ahead a bit, but when writing a job description, clearly laying out who the supervisor is so that she knows which
Mm-hmm.
one is it. Well, it's the senior pastor, and feeling empowered to have that conversation with him and share with him, I need your support,
Mm-hmm.
and then having that backup of, okay, because I feel like as an associate minister, knowing that I have the support of my senior pastor is of utmost importance. And I think it makes me a more effective minister to know that he supports what I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
and is going to have my back in it. If there's a situation that comes up, I have his support and there's someone in my corner.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like in our culture, we often assume that a lack of guidelines is indicative of how much we trust you. It's like, because I trust your experience and your expertise, like, you don't need these guidelines, right? And so I think I keep coming back to something that Brene Brown said. I can't remember when or where she said it, but she said clarity is kindness. And so, like, even if you believe that the person that you have hired is incredibly experienced, it's just kind to clearly lay out these expectations, so that they can do their job even more effectively than you think
Mhm.
they can.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think without having a clear understanding of guidelines or decision-making processes, then they're unable to work through more conflict that will come. Guidelines will help provide a framework for how you can discuss and move forward and work together. But without having those, when you get to kind of more conflict past these early stages, then you don't really know how to advocate for yourself or how to create your own boundaries of like, oh, this is something that I was called to do, or this is my role. Of course, I want your collaboration and your input, but ultimately I do want you to build that trust that I can make these decisions in conjunction with Travis, who will have the final say. um, but yeah, it creates a framework moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So it not only impacts what's happening at the moment, but it has implications for further down the road, in their relationship in her ministry at the church. Yeah.
And I was just gonna say too, I think, you know, when you're coming on somewhere and you're new or, whatever the situation, even if you've been there a while, those clear lines usually should be setting you up for success.
Hmm.
And that was one thing I was thinking about, and I might be getting ahead,
Yeah.
but her supervisor did not set her up for success.
Right.
He actually became a problem in her, a roadblock. And so I think, when we come on and when they're asking, what do you need? Or we're asking, what do we need? It's good to be clear and talk about, I want to be successful. And do you want me to be successful? Almost asking that. Do you want me to succeed in this position? And if you do, these are the things that I need
Hmm.
from you, vice versa. So it's expectations as well. So
Hmm.
you want somebody to be set up for success, but sometimes things are manipulated, unfortunately, as well.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, what you're highlighting, Bianca, it makes me think too about what was the relationship between Travis and these various committees. Because one of the strange things about being Baptist is, the buck doesn't stop with the senior pastor necessarily. It stops with whatever that church council looks like. And so for whatever reason, did Travis feel like he was not empowered to support Eleanor here, which then I think opens up a giant can of worms of like what's going on with this whole system.
Right.
But it makes me curious about why he felt like he couldn't or didn't want to, or whatever the case was, whatever impeded him from really supporting Eleanor in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Callie, in addition to that, I kept asking the question, where are the rest of the members of the worship committee when we're talking about the structure of the church? Now, we all know that it works this way sometimes, right? But like, she's the chair of a committee.
Hmm.
She's not the committee,
It's a very
but
good
she
point.
is.
That's a very good point. So, how can new ministers and lay leadership work together to navigate those informal sources of influence, like long-standing relationships, like the one that Patty has with the church?
I feel like new ministers are often at a disadvantage because they're still learning to build that trust with committees, like you're saying, these long-standing relationships. And I think it's important to acknowledge that challenging the status quo or conflict isn't necessarily a bad thing. And, as we were talking about, is this her first role? Is this her second role? Who hired her? Was the committee a part of that hiring process? Was it just Travis? Did Patty have no idea that they were hiring someone from this role because she had been doing it?
Hmm.
There's a lot of questions there. One thing that I think would help establish maybe a working relationship is just the acknowledgement that the changes made are not critiques of what has been going on and what's happening. They're just invitations to try something new.
Mhm.
I know that those long-standing relationships, it feels like when someone new comes in, it is kind of an indictment on what has already happened, or this, well, we just, that didn't really work well. Well, no, it's more of just a change of personality or gifts, but also an invitation to try something new. But yeah, changes are not critiques to what has been going on previously.
Good word. So, in what ways might gender dynamics have played a role in the challenges that Eleanor faced, particularly in navigating the opinions of the senior pastor Travis and Patty, the volunteer?
I have a question here
Okay.
that came to my mind as I thought about gender dynamics. I thought about the fact that I think it's more common than not that female ministers run into challenges from female members of the congregation sometimes more frequently than male members. And I'm not sure what to do with that in this situation, but would love to see if other people feel that that's a truth. And maybe we could dig into that a little bit.
I thought that was just in the Black church context. So it's good to know that this is happening across the board. I've been predominantly in African American Baptist churches, most
Hmm.
it's very historical churches all my life, and I have that is usually my number one roadblock is other women,
Hmm.
and then women on staff as well. So it is volunteers, members, and staff, and I think that had a lot to do with it. I think just her. Her gender played a role in this situation.
Hmm.
There was probably a lack of respect, especially when the male minister, I'm assuming he was male, the senior
Hmm.
pastor, um, was not setting her up for success.
Hmm.
Again, back to that word, and that phrase. And so it was kind of like, well, if he's not gonna if he keeps his hands off, then I guess I can do whatever I want to her and say whatever I want
Hmm.
because there was nobody kind of supporting her or even having her back. And so I found yeah, I mean, if the leadership, the main leadership is male, they got to support the woman that they hired. They have to.
Hmm.
Um, else people will run rapid and do what they want and talk to. And I've experienced that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Also felt like if the senior pastor just potentially might have downplayed the situation of like, oh, I'll let you ladies work it out.
Mm.
I feel like I've
Mm.
experienced that. It's unfair and not helpful, but it's like, oh, this is just, you all will figure it out together. When you're at women's ministry together, prayer group, it just feels almost belittling in some ways.
Hmm.
And then I was thinking about Eleanor's age. If this if Patty is potentially an older, more seasoned member of the congregation and has a vast wealth of experience, but perhaps feels overlooked because Eleanor was hired for this position. Or if Eleanor is younger and experiencing life, then it could also be a kind of downplayed that she would maybe not know what she was doing or would need more
Hmm.
guidance. And so that's why someone older might step in to provide that when a lay person is not the mentor of someone on staff, which really should be a connection made by the senior pastor finding a mentor or a support system or providing some guidelines.
I had a similar thought, Joy, in terms of just like wondering if it was that double whammy of age difference and gender
Hmm.
kind of coming into play here. And when I think about Patty, it's like she's likely someone who's been at the church for a long time and loves that church, right?
Hmm.
I also can't help but wonder, is this the first time this church has hired a woman?
Mm-hmm.
And so none of them really understand how that might have presented a different dynamic and needed additional like guidelines and clarity. Um, and I also wonder about that question of just, internalized patriarchy and sexism,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like not feeling the need to go to Eleanor because she's not the real pastor, massive air quotes if anyone's
Right.
listening and not watching. And so just how does the church address that systemically? Like if we want to be a church that supports women in ministry, what does it look like for us to put rubber to the road, knowing that simply hiring a woman's not enough?
And does the fact that Patty is a woman make Tyler pause because he doesn't want to be seen with this committee member? I mean, I wonder if this gender dynamic can play both directions. I don't want to be seen as silencing women in the church, so I'm not going to put a stop or squelch her power in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
hear.
Was Patty on the search committee for Travis? That's really what I want to know.
Okay, okay. Now we're getting to the good stuff here. Y'all are really digging in now.
Yeah,
Uh,
we want the tea.
yeah, there's definitely some tea that got left out of the case study. But I think it's interesting that y'all are picking up on this. There are dual layers here. She is a young new minister and she is female. And so those are two things that really needed support in different ways. That really could have, and if somebody had taken the time, if the pastor had taken the time or the search committee had taken the time to set those up, she may not have run into as many challenges for sure.
And this is not, again, a surprise. I mean, I think it's, I think church, like, I don't know who said it, if it was Callie or Joy, but when church, it's not enough to just hire a woman.
Right.
And I think that's the piece. We're still at that point where people are like, it is enough, but it's
Mhm.
not.
It's not.
I think organizations, churches think it's enough, but you got to, there's got to be some kind of resource set up to be open and discuss this new adventure that whatever the church has taken,
Mhm.
because that is a shift in dynamic, whether people want to address it or not. And so that's why a lot of this happens, from in organizations and in churches.
Mhm.
So we have to be honest with ourselves, with churches and organizations, about when there's a shift in who's leading, male, female, whichever, that we have to be real about that shift, that change. And so I think a lot of places are just not set up for that, or don't want to really have to address it. We're still at it's enough to just have a woman or a person of color, or um, you know, whatever.
Mhm.
So that's
Yeah.
It also, I think Naomi asked the question like, was Patty on Travis's search committee? I'm also curious about who was on Eleanor's. Because I know a colleague who was hired, first woman to be hired at this particular church, and found out later that the search committee was more progressive than the rest of the congregation was,
Mhm.
and had hired her in the hopes that they could drag the entire congregation towards being supportive of women in ministry. And that was a very rough context for her.
Mhm.
So I wonder if there's something kind of similar happening here.
That's a good question. It's a good question. It's so important for search committees to accurately represent the congregation at large. I think that what you're alluding to, Callie, here is something that happens more often than we would like to think. So let's help Harmony Baptist Church out. What steps could they take or could they have taken to proactively establish clearer supervision policies and prevent the issues that Eleanor faced? What could they have done ahead of time to help prevent this from happening?
I think just providing even a covenant of expectations or a job description. I know I've been a part of congregations that have not had job descriptions for associate or youth ministers and has really set people up for failure, for the inability to know what's expected, but also to know what lane in which they are to lead. I think that having something, a written document, and one thing that we do in a lot of American Baptist churches is we have a staff relations committee. So we have a group that supports the staff. And so if there's a complaint either against the staff person or the staff person has with a member of the congregation, then there's a committee that comes together that can provide support, sounding board, but also help broker and mediate conversations when there is conflict. So if Harmony Baptist Church had something like that, not just deacons or elders or council, but a specific committee that could support staff that maybe would have provided some help that Eleanor, if she didn't feel like she could go to Travis, and Travis is, we're unsure of where Travis is at this point. I wish him well. I wish him all the improvement as we all hope. But could go to someone else that would then provide that accountability for all members of the staff would be really helpful.
Yeah.
She would have also established a relationship with the search committee, assuming that that's the way they went about this. I realize that not every position is hired that way, but if it was, perhaps that search committee could be committed to not only calling the person, but staying together for a period, 6 months, a year, whatever, after, to make sure that that there's support there, that she has someone, she's going to have developed a relationship with them right through the process, and that could be a comfortable place that is a support. And of course, they would have clearly defined in the job description that they posted when they were searching who the supervisor was as well. I mean, that's another step, but then also having them there as an ongoing support for her in those beginning months of her tenure with the church.
I would say two things. The first one was, of course, being, the church being a little bit more forward thinking when it comes to a unique hire, like when it's a new type of hire that they haven't had before, being forward thinking in what kind of resources and things do we need to kind of make this a smooth transition and work with everybody to make sure that we're supporting. So that that's a resource piece that I think churches or anybody could really think about, instead of just like you said, it's the first woman and that's it, like
Right.
just beyond the celebration of that. But then the other piece is, one thing churches don't do well is HR practices. And we know that in the Baptist church. We just, it's a personnel committee. There's really nothing foundational for HR practices. So like, performance evaluations and professional development to kind of help in some of those areas. For the senior pastor, sometimes senior pastors and people who've been there a while, they go years without doing any kind of development, any kind of evaluation. And same with, the whole staff. So I think evaluations would help in communicating the things that need to be adjusted and changed. So yeah, that's hopefully, that's one thing churches could do a little better with is HR practices.
Sure.
I think similarly related to Bianca, I'm just thinking about the policies and procedures and either developing them if they aren't there or enforcing them if they are. Is the policy and procedure manual just something that sits on a shelf and collects dust, or is it actually something that dictates how the church runs? And I think the enforcement of those policies and procedures is so important because it's a document explaining who and how we want to be as a church. I think sometimes we let those policies and procedures fall to the wayside because we trust people and we trust that they'll get things done and whatnot. But I think it's more of an ethical document and saying this is how we want to treat people, and how we work as a church. So I feel like if we could kind of divorce that idea of, oh, if I'm asking you to follow these steps, it's because I don't trust you, and
Right.
instead connect it to, we're asking you to follow these steps because this reflects how we want to operate as a church, how we feel called to operate at the highest level of morals and ethics. That could have been something incredibly helpful to Eleanor here.
Sure. So, on the flip side, how might you advise Eleanor to seek clarity in her role and responsibilities? Some of you touched on it, but let's dig a little deeper into that.
My first thought was encouraging her to have a conversation with Travis. Just sometimes, and I think Bianca said this early on, being honest and advocating for yourself is one of the best things you can do for yourself. Nobody else is necessarily going to do it for you. So being willing to ask the hard questions, and hopefully Travis is a safe place to
Sure.
do that. I mean, we can't tell one way or the other from
Right.
this, but one would hope that that she could go to him, share her concerns, and they could discuss this together and come up with a plan of how to address the dynamic of that relationship with the worship committee and how to navigate those relationships within the church.
I would definitely agree with Naomi, and I would also say to encourage her to um, write up everything every time something like this happens. So, as you
Mm.
guys know, there's got to be a paper trail
Right.
and documenting what's happening every time, so that when she does have the conversation, she's got it laid out and can have the
Mhm.
conversation. But when it comes to, maybe her year review, she can go use that as going back and saying, again, advocating, this is what I dealt with, and I'd like things to change if for me in order for me to stay here. So documenting everything and keeping up with the experiences she was having.
It's good. Yeah.
I would encourage Eleanor to find an ally in the congregation, someone that she feels like she can trust, so that she can share, what's been going on as then she goes and shares that directly with Travis.
Mhm.
And I think if Travis is unwilling to hear her out, then to go to the leadership of the church with the receipts and with the history and really ask for more clarity or support. Not, of course, behind his back without, a secret meeting, but to say, hey, I do want to bring something. These are my concerns. And hopefully that would motivate the group to hear her out and for Travis to then provide some more support. But also, this is a story about accountability too. I mean,
Mhm.
we're all accountable as ministers, as lay leaders, as committee chairs, as senior
Mhm.
pastors. I mean, we are all accountable to how we treat one another. And so I think that we sometimes, if I could say, as women, fear that our accountability will, if we're asking someone to be held accountable, that we're just being nitpicky, or we'll just have to work through it, or this is a part of the process. My church is really trying, but accountability is, a part of our faith and very, very important in our congregations.
Yeah, I think for me, the advice to Eleanor is, she might be grumpy with me, but I'm gonna suggest like, how do you befriend Patty? Like how do you befriend those people in the congregation who are a little more challenging, and find the common ground, right? Because I think it can, if you don't engage those people, you will continue to believe the assumptions you have about each other.
Sure.
Right. So, like, how can we get together and identify, like, okay, obviously we both care about this ministry. You've been here longer than I have. I have some perspective that maybe you don't have as someone who's studied this or whatever Eleanor's experience is. What are the things that excite us both
Mhm.
about this? And just trying to identify, like, what are these bridge building moments? Not necessarily so Eleanor can get plugged into all of the informal power structures or whatnot, but as a way to kind of poke through them and see, like, what do we need to do to move this congregation in a healthier direction?
Patience is definitely needed in a more established church, and So kind of like you said, given the benefit of the doubt, figuring out how can I work on my relationship with that person, and let time, you know, kind of take care of some of that. Because I know I kind of went back. I want to go back to what I said before when I was talking about how I was encouraged how motivated she was to do things, but sometimes we do need to step back, and just not change everything right away, and just take a moment and say, let me see what they want to say, listening and building relationships, and then eventually, get buy-in, and that takes time. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's a wonderful perspective because Patty, as someone has referred to already once, is it could be a longstanding member who's invested a lot of years, right, in this congregation. And this she could have grown up here. We don't know, but she has invested. She's been there longer than Eleanor, and she sometimes just someone new is threatening because they're afraid
Right.
that everything is going to change. And so, yeah, I think that Kelly, that's a great perspective because by trying to befriend Patty, that can maybe help the defenses come down, and she can see that Eleanor is there to partner with them in ministry, not to be dictating how they do ministry. That's a beautiful thought.
Well, this brings our discussion of the case of the shifting sands of accountability to a close. I want to expend my deepest gratitude once again to this amazing leadership roundtable, the Reverends Callie, Bianca, Joy, and Naomi, for lending their wisdom and expertise to this important conversation. Your insights make this resource possible. And to our listeners, as you reflect on today's discussion, we encourage your church leadership to take these conversations a step further. You can find a complete list of next steps for your church, the full case study, and discussion questions on our website at bwim.info. By engaging with these realities, we can move toward a future where equity is a core foundation of ministry. Join us next time on BWIM's Leadership Roundtable as we continue to build healthier churches, one conversation at a time.